Most people think influence is about charisma, smooth talking, or having the right connections. They're dead wrong. After studying the most influential people across politics, business, and leadership for over a decade, I've discovered something that will shatter everything you think you know about influence. The people who truly shape decisions, change minds, and move others to action don't rely on charm or manipulation. They operate from a completely different mental framework. They think differently, speak differently, and influence differently than 99% of the population. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how they do it. By the end of this video, you'll have the same mental tools that allow a select few to command respect, shape opinions, and get others to willingly follow their lead. This isn't about tricks or tactics. This is about rewiring your mind to operate at a level most people never even know exists. Chapter 1. The fatal flaw in how most people try to influence others. Here's the brutal truth about why most people fail miserably at influence. They think influence is about them. They think it's about being more persuasive, more articulate, or more commanding. They focus on what they're going to say, how they're going to say it, and how they can make themselves look better. This is exactly backwards, and it's why their attempts at influence fall flat every single time. Real influence isn't about you at all. It's about understanding the invisible psychological forces that govern how people make decisions. Most people walk into conversations, meetings, and negotiations completely blind to these forces. They're trying to win arguments instead of winning minds. They're pushing their agenda instead of aligning with what the other person actually wants. The most influential people in the world understand something that the average person doesn't. Every single person you interact with is operating from their own unique psychological blueprint. This blueprint determines what they pay attention to, what they value, what they fear, and what motivates them to take action. When you understand someone's psychological blueprint, influencing them becomes almost effortless. When you ignore it, even the most logical arguments will be rejected. Think about the last time someone tried to convince you of something but completely missed the mark. Maybe they were trying to sell you something you didn't want or persuade you to do something that didn't align with your values. You probably tuned them out within seconds because they were speaking to their agenda, not yours. This is what happens when people try to influence without understanding psychological blueprints. The first step to true influence is shifting from a self-centered mindset to a blueprint-centered mindset. Instead of asking, "How can I get them to see my point?" you ask, "What does their psychological blueprint tell me about how they make decisions?" Instead of focusing on your arguments, you focus on their internal world. This single shift will transform every interaction you have. But here's where most people get it wrong. Even when they try to understand others, they focus on surface-level preferences instead of deep psychological drivers. They notice that someone likes sports or coffee, but they miss the underlying psychological patterns that truly drive behavior. The real blueprint isn't about what someone likes or dislikes. It's about their fundamental psychological architecture. Every person operates from one of several core psychological archetypes. Some people are driven by security and stability. Others are motivated by achievement and recognition. Some make decisions based on logic and data while others are guided by relationships and harmony. Some people move toward opportunities while others are primarily motivated by avoiding problems. When you can quickly identify which archetypes someone operates from, you can predict their behavior and communicate in a way that resonates at the deepest level. The most successful influencers become psychological chameleons, not in a manipulative way, but in a strategic way. They adjust their communication style to match the psychological frequency of whoever they're speaking with. When talking to someone driven by security, they emphasize stability and risk reduction. When speaking with achievement-oriented individuals, they focus on success and recognition. This isn't about changing your core message. It's about translating your message into the psychological language that the other person naturally speaks. This is why the same message can land completely differently with different people. It's not because people are illogical or unpredictable. It's because each person filters information through their unique psychological blueprint. Master influencers understand these blueprints and speak directly to them. Chapter 2. The hidden psychology of decision-making that determines every choice. If you want to influence someone's decision, you need to understand how decisions are actually made. Most people think decisions are rational, logical processes. They believe that if you present enough facts and make a compelling argument, people will naturally choose the best option. This is one of the most dangerous misconceptions in human psychology, and believing it will sabotage every attempt you make at influence. The reality is that all decisions are emotional first, then rationalized with logic afterward. Neuroscience has proven that when the emotional centers of the brain are damaged, people literally cannot make decisions, even simple ones. The rational mind doesn't make decisions. It justifies decisions that have already been made at the emotional level. This means that if you're only appealing to logic, you're completely missing the actual decision-making process. But here's what even most psychologists get wrong about emotions and decision-making. They think emotions are chaotic, unpredictable forces that cloud judgment. In reality, emotions follow predictable patterns. And these patterns can be mapped, understood, and influenced strategically. Every person has an emotional hierarchy. Certain emotions carry more weight than others in their decision-making process. Some people are primarily motivated by the emotion of excitement and possibility. Others are driven by fear of loss or regret. Some make decisions to feel important or significant, while others decide based on the desire to belong and connect. The key to emotional influence isn't to manipulate emotions, but to understand which emotions drive a particular person's decisions and then align your message with those emotional priorities. When you speak to someone's primary emotional drivers, their brain lights up with engagement. When you miss their emotional frequency, their brain literally shuts down and stops paying attention. Here's a framework that will revolutionize how you approach influence. Every decision a person makes is answering one of three fundamental questions. First, will this help me gain something I want? Second, will this help me avoid something I fear? Third, will this align with who I believe I am? These three psychological drivers, what I call the Trinity of motivation, govern every single decision, from what someone eats for breakfast to major life choices. Most people randomly appeal to different motivations without any strategy. They'll mix gain-focused messages with fear-based appeals and identity statements in the same conversation. This creates psychological confusion and weakens the influence attempt. Master influencers pick one primary motivation and build their entire message around it. If they're speaking to someone motivated by gain, they focus exclusively on benefits, opportunities, and positive outcomes. If they're addressing someone driven by fear avoidance, they emphasize security, protection, and risk mitigation. If they're talking to someone whose decisions are identity-driven, they connect their message to values, beliefs, and self-image. But here's the advanced level that separates true influence masters from everyone else. They understand that the same person can operate from different motivations depending on the context and their current life situation. Someone might be gain-focused in their career but fear-driven when it comes to their health. They might be identity-focused about their family but gain-focused about their finances. The most influential people read the situation and adjust their approach accordingly. The emotional decision-making process also follows a predictable sequence. First comes the trigger, something that creates emotional significance around a choice. Then comes the evaluation, where emotions determine whether something feels right or wrong. Finally comes the rationalization, where the logical mind creates reasons to justify what the emotions have already decided. Most people try to influence during the rationalization phase, but by then the decision has already been made. True influence happens during the trigger and evaluation phases. Understanding this sequence allows you to time your influence attempts perfectly. You create emotional significance around your message first. Then allow the evaluation process to unfold naturally and finally provide logical support that helps the person feel confident about what they're already inclined to do. This approach feels natural and persuasive rather than pushy or manipulative. Chapter 3. The Strategic Framework of Elite Communicators. Elite communicators don't just speak differently. They think about communication in a completely different way. While most people see communication as a way to share information or express themselves, strategic communicators understand that every interaction is an opportunity to shape reality. They're not just talking. They're architecting outcomes through carefully designed mental experiences. The foundation of strategic communication is understanding that you're never just communicating facts or opinions. You're creating an experience in someone else's mind. Every word you choose, every concept you introduce, every example you give is building a mental model in the listener's brain. Most people let this happen randomly, hoping their message will somehow land correctly. Strategic communicators take complete control of the mental experience they create. This starts with something I call reality architecture. Before you ever open your mouth, you need to design the mental landscape you want to create. What do you want the person to see, feel, and understand? What mental associations do you want them to make? What beliefs do you want them to question or strengthen? Elite communicators map this out strategically before they ever begin speaking. The first element of reality architecture is context setting. Most people jump straight into their message without establishing the proper context for how it should be received. This is like trying to plant seeds in unprepared soil. Strategic communicators always begin by shaping the context. They establish why this conversation matters, what's at stake, and how the listener should frame what they're about to hear. They prime the listener's mind to receive their message in exactly the way they intend. Context setting isn't just about giving background information. It's about creating psychological readiness. When someone's mind is in the right state, they become naturally receptive to your message. When their mind is in the wrong state, even brilliant insights will be rejected or misunderstood. Master communicators can read someone's current mental state and either work with it or skillfully shift it to a more conducive state. The second element is concept bridging. This is where most communication breaks down. People introduce new ideas without connecting them to concepts the listener already understands and accepts. The brain resists information that doesn't fit into existing mental frameworks. Strategic communicators build bridges between new concepts and familiar ones, making their ideas feel natural and logical rather than foreign and threatening. Concept bridging requires understanding someone's existing mental models and using them as a foundation for new ideas. If someone already believes that hard work leads to success, you can bridge to the concept that strategic thinking amplifies hard work. If they already accept that timing matters in business, you can bridge to the idea that psychological timing matters in influence. You're not changing their fundamental beliefs. You're expanding them in the direction you want them to go. The third element is progression mapping. Elite communicators never present their full message all at once. They understand that the mind needs to be led through a logical progression where each step builds naturally on the previous one. They map out the mental journey they want to take someone on, ensuring that each point prepares the mind for the next point. This is why great communicators often seem to be reading minds. They're not psychic. They're just thinking several steps ahead. They know where they want to end up so they can design a pathway that feels inevitable. Each point they make creates curiosity or raises a question that their next point will address. The listener feels like they're discovering insights rather than being told them. The fourth element is resistance anticipation. Master communicators know that every mind has built-in resistance mechanisms that automatically reject ideas that threaten existing beliefs or challenge comfort zones. Instead of being surprised by resistance, they anticipate it and address it proactively. They acknowledge potential objections before they're raised and reframe them in a way that actually strengthens their position. This isn't about manipulating people past their resistance. It's about understanding their legitimate concerns and addressing them honestly. When you acknowledge someone's resistance and show that you understand where it comes from, you build trust and credibility. When you try to bulldoze past resistance, you create more of it. Chapter 4. The psychological triggers that control human behavior. Human behavior isn't random or chaotic. It follows predictable patterns driven by psychological triggers that most people don't even know exist. These triggers operate below the level of conscious awareness, automatically influencing how people think, feel, and act. The people who understand and can activate these triggers hold extraordinary power over human behavior. Today you're going to learn how these triggers work and how to use them ethically and effectively. The first and most powerful trigger is the principle of psychological consistency. Once a person takes a position or makes a commitment, they have an overwhelming need to remain consistent with that decision. This isn't just about maintaining their reputation with others. It's about maintaining their self-image as a rational, consistent person. The need for consistency is so strong that people will often continue course of action even when it no longer serves them, simply to avoid the psychological discomfort of inconsistency. Strategic influencers use this principle by getting people to make small commitments that align with larger goals. They don't ask for big changes all at once. They start with tiny commitments that feel easy and natural, then gradually build toward larger commitments. Each small yes creates psychological momentum toward the next yes. This is why the most effective sales processes feel like natural progressions rather than high-pressure pitches. But here's the advanced application that most people miss. You can also trigger consistency by getting people to explain their own reasoning. When someone articulates why they believe something or why they want to take action, they become psychologically invested in that reasoning. They've now committed not just to a position, but to the logic that supports that position. This makes them much more likely to follow through on actions that align with their stated reasoning. The second trigger is social proof, but not in the way most people understand it. Social proof isn't just about showing that other people are doing something. It's about showing that people like them, people they respect, or people they aspire to be like are doing something. The brain constantly asks, what do people like me do in this situation? When you can answer that question convincingly, behavior change becomes almost automatic. The key to using social proof effectively is precision targeting. Generic social proof like millions of people is much less effective than specific social proof like people in your industry or people facing your exact challenge. The more similar the social proof is to the person you're influencing, the more powerful its effect. This is why case studies and testimonials from similar situations are so much more persuasive than general statistics. The third trigger is the scarcity principle, but again, not in the manipulative way most people use it. True scarcity isn't about creating fake urgency. It's about helping people understand the genuine cost of inaction or delay. Every decision involves opportunity cost. When someone chooses one path, they're automatically closing off other paths. Strategic influences help people see these opportunity costs clearly. The psychology of scarcity taps into loss aversion, one of the strongest human psychological biases. People feel the pain of potential loss much more intensely than they feel the pleasure of potential gain. When you can help someone see what they might lose by not taking action, you create powerful motivation, but this only works when the scarcity is genuine and the potential loss is real. The fourth trigger is reciprocity. The psychological need to return favors and maintain balanced relationships. When someone does something for us, we feel psychological pressure to do something for them in return. This isn't just about major favors. Even small acts of value creation trigger the reciprocity response. The key is to give value before asking for anything in return. But the most powerful form of reciprocity isn't giving things. It's giving insights, perspectives, or opportunities that the person couldn't have accessed without you. When you help someone see something they couldn't see before, or understand something they were confused about, you create intellectual debt. They feel grateful not just for what you've given them, but for how you've expanded their thinking. The fifth trigger is authority, but not positional authority. Psychological authority comes from demonstrating expertise, experience, and results in areas that matter to the person you're influencing. People naturally defer to those who know more than they do about subjects that are important to them. The key is not to claim authority, but to demonstrate it through your insights, questions, and understanding of their situation. True authority is also about intellectual honesty. When you acknowledge the limits of your knowledge or admit when you're not sure about something, you actually increase your credibility rather than diminish it. People trust those who are honest about what they know and what they don't know. The sixth trigger is commitment and consistency's cousin, cognitive dissonance resolution. When people hold conflicting beliefs or when their actions don't align with their values, they experience psychological discomfort. The mind automatically works to resolve this discomfort, usually by changing beliefs or rationalizing actions. Strategic influences can create productive cognitive dissonance that motivates positive change. The key is to help people see gaps between their current situation and their stated values or goals. When someone realizes that their current actions aren't aligned with what they say they want, they feel compelled to resolve that inconsistency. The most elegant influence happens when you help people see these gaps themselves rather than pointing them out directly. Chapter 5. Master-level persuasion techniques used by world leaders. The most powerful people in the world, from heads of state to business leaders to social movement organizers, all use a specific set of persuasion techniques that go far beyond basic influence principles. These are not techniques you'll find in typical communication books because they operate at a level of sophistication that most people never reach. Today you're going to learn the exact methods used by those who shape nations, industries, and human history. The first master-level technique is called ideological packaging. Most people try to persuade others to adopt their specific ideas or solutions. Master persuaders understand that people resist new ideas, but they embrace ideas that feel like extensions of beliefs they already hold. The key is packaging your message inside ideological frameworks that your audience already accepts. This isn't about deception or manipulation. It's about translation. Every person operates from a set of core beliefs about how the world works, what's important and what's right or wrong. When you can connect your message to these existing beliefs, it feels natural and obvious rather than foreign and threatening. Someone who values freedom will respond to ideas framed around liberation and choice. Someone who values security will embrace the same ideas when framed around protection and stability. The sophistication comes in understanding that the same message can be packaged in multiple ideological frameworks depending on your audience. A business innovation can be presented as a way to gain competitive advantage to growth-oriented leaders, as a way to reduce risk to security-focused managers, or as a way to serve customers better to relationship-focused teams. The core message remains the same, but the ideological package changes to match the audience's existing belief structure. The second technique is strategic vulnerability. This sounds counterintuitive because most people think influence requires projecting strength and certainty. Master persuaders understand that selective vulnerability creates deeper connection and trust than constant strength projection. When you reveal appropriate struggles, uncertainties or challenges, you accomplish several psychological goals simultaneously. First, you humanize yourself and create emotional connection. People trust those who seem real and relatable more than those who seem perfect and untouchable. Second, you trigger the helper instinct. When someone shares a genuine challenge, others naturally want to help solve it. Third, you model the kind of openness you want in return. When you're appropriately vulnerable, others become more open and honest with you. The key word is strategic. This isn't about oversharing or appearing weak. It's about carefully chosen moments of authentic disclosure that serve the relationship and the conversation. Master persuaders reveal struggles that their audience can relate to, uncertainties that make them seem thoughtful rather than indecisive, and challenges that demonstrate their commitment to important values. The third technique is consensus manufacturing. This doesn't mean manufacturing fake consensus, but rather helping groups discover genuine common ground that they might not have recognized on their own. Most people focus on areas of disagreement and try to argue their way through them. Master persuaders focus on areas of agreement and build from there. The process starts with identifying shared values, goals, or concerns that everyone in the group can embrace. This might be a common challenge they're all facing. A shared vision of success or mutual recognition of what's at stake. Once this common ground is established, specific solutions can be evaluated based on how well they serve these shared interests. This technique is particularly powerful because it transforms the dynamic from you versus them to all of us versus the problem. Instead of trying to convince others to adopt your position, you're collaboratively exploring solutions to challenges that everyone acknowledges. This feels like problem solving rather than persuasion, which makes people much more receptive to new ideas. The fourth technique is temporal reframing. Most persuasion attempts focus on immediate benefits or consequences. Master persuaders understand that different people are motivated by different time horizons. And the most powerful persuasion often involves shifting someone's temporal perspective. Some people are motivated by immediate results, others by long-term consequences, and still others by legacy and lasting impact. The key is identifying which temporal frame motivates your audience and then positioning your message within that frame. If someone is focused on quarterly results, you emphasize immediate impacts and short-term benefits. If they're thinking about their legacy, you focus on long-term consequences and lasting change. If they're worried about current problems, you show how your solution addresses immediate pain points. Advanced temporal reframing involves helping people see connections between different time horizons. You might help a short-term focused person understand the long-term consequences of current decisions or help a long-term thinker see how immediate actions serve future goals. This expanded temporal awareness often leads to better decisions and stronger commitment. The fifth technique is systematic doubt introduction. This sounds negative, but it's actually about helping people question assumptions that might be limiting their thinking or options. Most people operate from unexamined beliefs and assumptions that constrain their decision-making. Master persuaders skillfully introduce productive doubt that opens minds to new possibilities. This isn't about making people doubt themselves or their fundamental values. It's about helping them question specific assumptions that might not be serving them well. Maybe they assume that change is always risky, that success requires sacrifice, or that certain goals are impossible. By introducing doubt about these limiting beliefs, you create space for new thinking. The technique works by asking thoughtful questions rather than making direct challenges. Instead of telling someone their assumption is wrong, you might ask, "What if that weren't necessarily true?" Or, "Have you seen situations where that assumption didn't hold?" This allows people to reconsider their beliefs without feeling attacked or defensive. The sixth and most advanced technique is reality redefinition. This is the ability to help people see familiar situations in completely new ways by changing the framework they use to understand what's happening. Master persuaders don't just present new information. They help people develop new ways of interpreting information they already have. This might involve helping someone see a challenge as an opportunity, a setback as valuable feedback, or a conflict as a chance for deeper understanding. It could mean reframing a business decision from a financial question to a strategic question or from a risk management issue to a competitive advantage opportunity. The facts remain the same, but the meaning changes completely. Chapter 6. The emotional intelligence advantage that separates masters from amateurs. Most people think emotional intelligence is about being nice, empathetic, or good with people. This surface-level understanding is exactly why they never develop real emotional mastery. True emotional intelligence isn't about managing emotions or being emotionally aware. It's about understanding emotions as data, using them as strategic tools, and leveraging emotional dynamics to create predictable outcomes in any interaction. The foundation of emotional mastery begins with understanding that emotions are not random feelings that happen to you. Emotions are sophisticated information processing systems that have evolved over millions of years to help humans navigate complex social environments. Every emotion carries specific data about threats, opportunities, social dynamics, and decision-making priorities. When you learn to read this emotional data accurately, you gain access to information that others completely miss. Consider anger, which most people see as a negative emotion to be controlled or suppressed. From an emotional intelligence perspective, anger is data indicating that someone perceives a threat to something they value highly. When you encounter anger in others, you're not dealing with an irrational person who needs to calm down. You're dealing with someone whose value system has been triggered. The strategic response isn't to counter the anger or dismiss it, but to identify what they're protecting and either address that concern or reframe the situation to show that their values aren't actually threatened. Fear operates similarly. Most people try to reassure fearful individuals or convince them their fears are irrational. Master influencers understand that fear is data indicating someone perceives potential loss or harm. Instead of dismissing the fear, they identify what specific loss the person is trying to avoid. Then either show how that loss can be prevented or reframe the situation to demonstrate that the feared outcome is actually less likely than they think. The second level of emotional intelligence involves understanding emotional contagion and social emotional dynamics. Emotions are not contained within individuals. They spread through groups and interactions in predictable ways. When you walk into a room, you're not just bringing your own emotional state. You're either contributing to the existing emotional atmosphere or actively changing it. Master influencers understand how to read group emotional states and strategically influence them. This requires developing what I call emotional peripheral vision. Most people are so focused on the content of conversations that they miss the emotional undercurrents that are actually determining the outcome. You need to simultaneously track multiple emotional streams. Your own emotional state, the emotional state of each person you're interacting with, and the collective emotional atmosphere of the group. This sounds complex, but it becomes automatic with practice. The third level involves emotional calibration. The ability to deliberately generate specific emotional states in yourself and others. Different emotional states are optimal for different types of interactions. High energy and excitement work well for brainstorming and vision casting. Calm confidence is better for problem solving and decision. Focused intensity is ideal for negotiation and persuasion. Master influencers don't leave emotional states to chance. They strategically calibrate the emotional environment for the outcome they want to achieve. Emotional calibration starts with self-regulation, but not in the way most people think. It's not about suppressing or controlling emotions. It's about consciously choosing which emotional state will be most effective for your current situation and then generating that state deliberately. This requires developing a repertoire of emotional states you can access on demand and understanding which states are most effective for different types of interactions. The fourth level is emotional leverage. Using emotional dynamics to amplify your influence. This involves understanding that different people have different emotional trigger points and learning to activate these triggers ethically and strategically. Some people are motivated by excitement about possibilities. Others respond to concern about potential problems. Some are driven by pride in their competence, while others are motivated by the desire to be helpful or valuable to others. Emotional leverage isn't manipulation because you're not creating fake emotions or deceiving people about reality. You're simply presenting information and opportunities in ways that naturally activate emotional responses that lead to better decisions. When you help someone feel excited about a genuine opportunity or appropriately concerned about a real risk, you're using emotional leverage to serve their interests as well as your own. The fifth level is emotional prediction. The ability to anticipate how people will respond emotionally to different scenarios before they happen. This allows you to plan your interaction strategically, avoiding emotional pitfalls and maximizing emotional engagement. Most people react to emotional responses after they happen. Master influencers predict them in advance and structure their interactions to generate optimal emotional responses. Emotional prediction requires understanding individual emotional patterns and universal emotional triggers. Every person has a unique emotional signature, consistent ways they respond to specific types of situations. Some people always become defensive when their competence is questioned. Others get excited when presented with new challenges. Some withdraw when they feel pressured while others become more engaged. When you understand someone's emotional signature, you can predict their responses and plan your approach accordingly. Chapter 7. Advanced Social Dynamics and Group Psychology. Individual influence is just the beginning. The real test of your influence mastery comes when you need to shape group dynamics, manage multiple stakeholders, and navigate complex social environments where different people have different agendas, loyalties, and motivations. This is where most people's influence attempts fall apart completely because they don't understand how social dynamics actually work. Groups don't think or make decisions the same way individuals do. Group psychology operates according to different rules, different pressures, and different motivations. When you try to influence a group using individual influence techniques, you're using the wrong tools for the wrong situation. You need to understand the invisible social forces that govern group behavior and learn to work with these forces rather than against them. The first principle of group dynamics is understanding social roles and how they shape behavior. In every group interaction, people automatically assume specific social roles that determine how they participate, what they pay attention to, and how they make decisions. These roles include the leader who sets direction, the skeptic who questions ideas, the supporter who builds consensus, the expert who provides technical knowledge, and the diplomat who manages relationships. Most people don't consciously choose their social role. They fall into habitual patterns based on their personality, past experiences, and the immediate social context. But master influencers understand that social roles are fluid and can be influenced strategically. You can either work with someone's natural role tendencies or help them shift into different roles that better serve the group's objectives. The key insight is that people are more committed to decisions when they feel their role has been respected and utilized effectively. The expert wants their knowledge acknowledged and incorporated. The skeptic wants their concerns addressed thoughtfully. The supporter wants to help build positive momentum. When you honor these role needs while guiding the group toward your desired outcome, people feel satisfied with the process and committed to the result. The second principle involves understanding group decision-making patterns. Groups rarely make decisions through rational analysis of alternatives. Instead, they go through predictable emotional and social phases that ultimately determine the outcome. These phases include initial positioning, where people stake out their territories, exploration, where different perspectives are aired, conflict, where differences are confronted, and resolution, where consensus emerges. Most people try to rush groups toward resolution without allowing the necessary phases to unfold naturally. This creates resistance and poor commitment even when decisions are reached. Master influencers guide groups through these phases strategically, ensuring that each phase accomplishes its psychological and social purpose while gradually building momentum toward their preferred outcome. The third principle is managing alliance structures within groups. Every group has a complex web of relationships, loyalties, and influence patterns that operate beneath the surface of formal interactions. Some people have historical alliances, others have competing agendas, and still others serve as bridge builders between different factions. Understanding these alliance structures allows you to predict how different proposals will be received and identify the key relationships you need to influence. This doesn't mean playing politics in a manipulative way. It means understanding the human reality of group dynamics and working with it effectively. When you know that two people typically support each other's ideas, you can approach them as a unit rather than trying to convince them separately. When you understand that someone serves as a bridge between different factions, you can work through them to build broader consensus. The fourth principle involves strategic use of social proof within groups. Group members are constantly looking to each other for cues about what's acceptable, desirable, and smart. When influential group members endorse an idea, others become much more likely to accept it as well. Master influencers identify the social proof sources within each group and focus their initial influence efforts on these key individuals. But here's the sophisticated part that most people miss. Different people serve as social proof sources for different types of decisions. The person who influences technical decisions might be different from the person who influences strategic decisions or relationship decisions. Master influencers map these influence networks and approach the right people for the right types of decisions. The fifth principle is energy management within group interactions. Every group has a collective energy level that rises and falls throughout their interaction. High energy periods are optimal for generating ideas, building enthusiasm, and making bold decisions. Low energy periods are better for detailed analysis, careful consideration, and incremental progress. Most people ignore energy dynamics and try to force important decisions during low energy periods or rush through complex analysis during high energy phases. Master influencers read group energy levels and either work with the current energy or strategically shift the energy to match their objectives. They know how to generate excitement when bold action is needed, create focused calm when careful analysis is required, and build positive momentum when consensus is the goal. The sixth principle involves managing information flow and attention within groups. Groups can only process limited amounts of information at one time. When too much information is presented simultaneously, group decision-making breaks down. When too little information is provided, groups make poor decisions based on incomplete understanding. Master influencers control information flow strategically, presenting the right amount of information at the right time in the right sequence. This includes understanding that different types of information need to be processed in different ways. Emotional information like stories and examples needs time to resonate. Analytical information like data and comparisons needs time for evaluation. Vision information like future possibilities needs time for imagination. When you sequence information types correctly and allow appropriate processing time, groups make better decisions and feel more confident about their choices. Chapter 8. The Psychology of Credibility and Authority. Authority isn't given. It's earned through a complex psychological process that most people completely misunderstand. They think authority comes from titles, positions, or formal credentials. While these things can provide a starting point, real authority, the kind that actually influences behavior and shapes decisions, is created through psychological mechanisms that have nothing to do with organizational charts or official designations. True authority is psychological authority, and it operates according to specific principles that you can understand, develop, and deploy strategically. The most influential people in any field aren't necessarily those with the highest formal positions. They're those who have mastered the psychology of credibility and learned to generate authentic authority through their words, actions, and presence. The foundation of psychological authority is competence demonstration, but not in the way most people think. Most people try to establish authority by talking about their qualifications, listing their achievements, or name-dropping their credentials. This approach often backfires because it feels like bragging and triggers skepticism rather than respect. Real competence demonstration happens through the quality of your thinking, the depth of your understanding, and the sophistication of your insights. When you speak about complex topics with nuanced understanding, ask questions that reveal deep knowledge or offer perspectives that others hadn't considered. You demonstrate competence without claiming it. People recognize expertise through the quality of someone's thinking much more than through their resume. This is why some people command immediate respect when they speak while others with impressive credentials are ignored or dismissed. The key is developing what I call diagnostic intelligence. The ability to quickly understand situations, identify core issues, and offer insights that prove you truly comprehend what's happening. When someone is struggling with a challenge and you can immediately identify aspects of their situation that they hadn't recognized themselves, you establish competence credibility instantly. This requires genuinely developing your analytical capabilities, not just learning to fake understanding. The second element of psychological authority is consistency between claims and behavior. People grant authority to those whose actions align with their words and whose behavior reflects their stated values and beliefs. Inconsistency destroys authority faster than almost anything else because it signals that someone either doesn't believe their own message or lacks the discipline to live according to their principles. This means that building authority requires ruthless self-awareness about the gaps between what you say and what you do. If you advocate for strategic thinking, your own decisions need to reflect strategic analysis. If you teach about emotional intelligence, your own emotional responses need to demonstrate mastery. If you promote discipline and focus, your own behavior needs to exemplify these qualities. People are constantly watching for these alignments and inconsistencies, often subconsciously. The third element is intellectual honesty and appropriate humility. Counterintuitively, admitting when you don't know something or acknowledging the limits of your expertise actually increases your credibility rather than diminishing it. This happens because intellectual honesty signals confidence and authenticity. People trust those who are honest about what they know and what they don't know more than those who pretend to have expertise they don't actually possess. This doesn't mean being self-deprecating or undermining your own competence. It means being precise about your areas of strength and honest about areas where others might have more expertise. When you say, "I don't have direct experience with that, but based on what I know about similar situations," you sound more credible than if you pretended to be an expert in everything. The fourth element is value delivery before value extraction. Authority is granted to those who consistently provide value to others without immediately asking for something in return. This could be insights that help people see their situations more clearly, perspectives that help them make better decisions, or simply attention and understanding that helps them feel heard and valued. The key insight is that authority accumulates over time through repeated demonstrations of value. Each time you help someone understand something better, solve a problem more effectively, or see opportunities they had missed, you build authority credits. These credits compound over time, creating a reputation for being valuable to interact with. People begin to seek your opinions, defer to your judgment, and implement your suggestions because past experience has taught them that your input typically proves helpful. The fifth element is emotional regulation under pressure. Authority figures are those who remain calm, clear thinking, and decisive when others become reactive, confused, or paralyzed. This doesn't mean being emotionally distant or unfailing. It means maintaining your center and your judgment capabilities even when situations become challenging or stressful. People naturally look to those who seem to understand what's happening and know how to respond effectively when uncertainty or pressure increases. This requires developing genuine emotional resilience and stress management capabilities, not just learning to appear calm on the surface. When your thinking remains clear under pressure, others naturally defer to your judgment because their own thinking capabilities may be compromised by stress or emotion. The sixth element is strategic patience and long-term perspective. Authority figures think beyond immediate circumstances and can see patterns, trends, and consequences that others miss. They're not reactive to every change or crisis because they understand how current events fit into larger contexts. This broader perspective allows them to remain steady when others are anxious and provide guidance based on deeper understanding rather than surface-level responses. Developing this broader perspective requires continuously expanding your knowledge base, studying patterns across different fields and time periods, and practicing the discipline of thinking systemically rather than just responding to immediate circumstances. When people recognize that you see things they don't see and understand implications they haven't considered, they naturally grant you authority in decision-making situations. Chapter 9. Strategic Conversation Management and Flow Control. Every conversation has an invisible architecture that determines its outcome. Most people participate in conversations reactively, responding to whatever is said without any strategic plan for where the interaction should go or how it should unfold. This reactive approach leaves the outcome to chance and often leads to conversations that waste time, create confusion, or produce unsatisfactory results for everyone involved. Master influencers understand that conversations are systems that can be designed, managed, and optimized for specific outcomes. They don't just participate in conversations, they architect them. They understand conversation dynamics, flow patterns, and control mechanisms that allow them to guide interactions toward productive conclusions while making the process feel natural and collaborative. The foundation of conversation management is outcome definition. Before entering any important conversation, you need clarity about what you want to accomplish. This isn't just about what you want to say or what points you want to make. It's about what you want the other person to think, feel, understand, or decide by the end of the interaction. Most conversations fail because people focus on their talking points rather than their desired outcomes. Outcome definition requires thinking beyond your immediate agenda to consider what would constitute a genuinely successful interaction for all parties involved. The most effective conversations are those where everyone leaves feeling that something valuable was accomplished. This doesn't mean everyone gets everything they want, but everyone should feel that their time was well spent and their interests were considered. The second element is opening strategy. The first few minutes of any conversation set the tone, establish the framework, and create expectations for everything that follows. Most people waste these crucial moments on small talk or jump immediately into their agenda without properly setting up the conversation context. Master conversationalists use opening strategically to create optimal conditions for their desired outcome. An effective opening accomplishes several objectives simultaneously. It establishes rapport and connection with the other person. It creates clarity about the purpose and scope of the conversation. It sets expectations about how the interaction will unfold. And it begins moving the conversation toward your desired outcome while respecting the other person's agenda and concerns. The key is balancing structure with flexibility. You want enough structure to ensure the conversation stays focused and productive, but enough flexibility to adapt to unexpected information or changing dynamics. This requires developing a range of opening approaches that you can select based on the situation, the other person, and your objectives. The third element is momentum management. Every conversation has natural rhythms of energy, engagement, and progress. Some moments are optimal for introducing new ideas, others for building agreement, and still others for addressing concerns or objections. Master conversationalists read these rhythms and time their interventions to maximize impact and minimize resistance. This involves understanding that conversational momentum can be built, maintained, redirected, or reset depending on what the situation requires. When momentum is positive and moving toward your desired outcome, you want to maintain and amplify it. When momentum is stalled or moving in the wrong direction, you need to redirect or reset it. When momentum is moving too fast, you might need to slow it down to ensure understanding and buy-in. The fourth element is question architecture. Questions are the most powerful tools for conversation management because they control attention, direct thinking, and reveal information while appearing to serve the other person's interests. Most people ask random questions based on curiosity or immediate need for information. Strategic conversationalists design question sequences that systematically move conversations toward their desired outcomes. Effective question architecture involves using different types of questions for different purposes. Open-ended questions encourage exploration and reveal thinking patterns. Clarifying questions ensure understanding and demonstrate attention. Hypothetical questions test assumptions and open minds to new possibilities. Leading questions guide thinking in specific directions. Commitment questions secure agreement and establish next steps. The sophistication comes in sequencing questions strategically so that each question prepares the mind for the next question and the overall sequence leads to insights, realizations or commitments that serve your objectives. This requires thinking several questions ahead and being prepared to adapt your sequence based on the responses you receive. The fifth element is resistance navigation. Every conversation involves some degree of resistance, whether to new ideas, different perspectives, or proposed actions. Most people either ignore resistance and hope it goes away or confront it directly and create more opposition. Master conversationalists understand that resistance is information about the other person's concerns, priorities, and decision-making process. The key to resistance navigation is first acknowledging and understanding the resistance rather than trying to overcome it immediately. When someone resists an idea, they're telling you something important about their perspective, their concerns, or their priorities. If you can understand what's driving the resistance, you can often address the underlying issue rather than fighting the surface-level opposition. This requires developing comfort with tension and disagreement rather than trying to avoid or eliminate these dynamics immediately. Some resistance indicates genuine concerns that need to be addressed. Other resistance reflects automatic patterns or outdated thinking that can be gently challenged. Still, other resistance comes from emotional reactions that need to be acknowledged and processed before logical discussion can proceed. The sixth element is closing strategy. How you end conversations is just as important as how you begin them. But this is where most people become completely passive. They let conversations drift to natural conclusions without ensuring that objectives have been met, understanding has been achieved, or next steps have been established. Effective closing strategy involves several components. Summarizing what was discussed and what was decided ensures shared understanding and prevents future misunderstandings. Identifying specific next steps creates accountability and momentum. Confirming timeline and responsibilities prevents confusion about who will do what and when. And ending on a positive note maintains relationship quality and sets up future interactions for success. Chapter 10. Implementation Mastery. Turning influence into lasting change. The ultimate test of influence isn't whether you can get people to agree with you in the moment. It's whether you can inspire lasting change in how they think, act, and make decisions. Most influence attempts fail at this final stage because people focus on winning conversations rather than creating sustainable transformation. They achieve temporary compliance but not genuine commitment. Surface-level agreement but not deep-level change. True influence mastery means understanding the difference between momentary persuasion and lasting transformation. It means knowing how to plant ideas that continue growing after the conversation ends. Create commitments that people actually follow through on and inspire changes that become permanent parts of how someone operates. This requires understanding the psychology of behavior change and the social dynamics of sustainable transformation. The foundation of implementation mastery is understanding that all lasting change follows a predictable psychological process. First comes awareness, where people recognize that their current approach isn't optimal. Then comes acceptance, where they acknowledge the need for change. Next comes adoption, where they begin trying new approaches. Finally comes integration, where new behaviors become habitual and automatic. Most influence attempts focus only on the awareness phase. People present information, make arguments, and assume that awareness will automatically lead to behavior change. But awareness is just the beginning of the change process. Each phase requires different strategies and addresses different psychological barriers. Master influencers guide people through the entire change process rather than stopping at awareness. The awareness phase requires helping people recognize gaps between their current results and their desired outcomes. This isn't about criticizing their current approach, but about helping them see opportunities for improvement. The key is connecting current problems or limitations to specific behaviors or thinking patterns. When someone can see the connection between what they're doing and what they're getting, awareness becomes motivation for change. The acceptance phase involves overcoming the natural resistance to changing established patterns. People resist change even when they intellectually recognize its value because change requires effort, involves uncertainty, and threatens their sense of competence. Overcoming this resistance requires addressing both the rational concerns and the emotional barriers that keep people stuck in familiar patterns. This is where many influence attempts fail because they try to logic people past emotional resistance. But emotional barriers are real and legitimate. Change is uncomfortable, uncertain, and risky. People need support and encouragement, not just logical arguments. They need to feel that the benefits of change outweigh the costs and that they have the capability to succeed with new approaches. The adoption phase focuses on making new behaviors as easy and natural as possible. This involves breaking complex changes into manageable steps, providing clear guidance and support, and creating environmental conditions that support rather than undermine new behaviors. Most people try to change too much too quickly and become overwhelmed by the complexity of transformation. Master influencers understand that sustainable change happens through small consistent adjustments rather than dramatic overnight transformations. They help people identify the smallest possible first step that moves them in the right direction and focus on establishing that single behavior before adding complexity. This approach builds confidence and momentum while avoiding the overwhelm that kills most change attempts. The integration phase ensures that new behaviors become permanent rather than temporary experiments. This requires understanding the difference between conscious change and unconscious habit formation. Conscious change requires ongoing willpower and attention. Unconscious habits operate automatically without depleting mental energy. The goal is helping new behaviors become unconscious habits that don't require constant effort to maintain. This involves understanding the psychology of habit formation and designing change processes that leverage rather than fight against how the brain naturally operates. Habits form through repetition in consistent contexts with clear triggers and rewards. Master influencers help people identify environmental triggers that will prompt new behaviors and create reward systems that reinforce positive changes. But implementation mastery goes beyond individual behavior change to include social and environmental support systems. Most change attempts fail because they ignore the social context in which behavior change must occur. People are influenced by their relationships, their environment, and their social group's expectations. Sustainable change requires alignment between personal decisions and social context. This means helping people think strategically about how to manage the social dynamics of change. Some people in their environment will support new behaviors while others might resist or undermine them. Some situations will make new behaviors easier while others will create pressure to revert to old patterns. Master influences help people anticipate these dynamics and develop strategies for maintaining new behaviors even when social pressure pushes toward old patterns. The final element of implementation mastery is building systems that support ongoing development rather than one-time change. Real transformation isn't a destination you reach. It's an ongoing process of continuous improvement. This requires helping people develop the mindset and capabilities for lifelong learning and adaptation rather than just solving immediate problems. This involves teaching people how to monitor their own progress, identify areas for continued development, and adapt their approaches based on changing circumstances. It means helping them develop the analytical capabilities to recognize what's working and what isn't and the flexibility to adjust their strategies accordingly. The goal is creating autonomous learners who can continue developing long after your direct influence ends. Chapter 11. Advanced Psychological Warfare. Defending against manipulation while maintaining ethical influence. The dark side of influence mastery is understanding how these same principles can be used to manipulate, deceive, and exploit others. This isn't knowledge I share to teach manipulation, but to provide psychological armor against those who would use these techniques against you. The most sophisticated manipulators are those who understand influence psychology deeply and use it without ethical constraints. If you don't understand their methods, you're defenseless against them. The first category of manipulation involves psychological exploitation of cognitive biases and emotional vulnerabilities. Master manipulators study their targets carefully to identify specific weaknesses, fears, and desires that can be leveraged for control. They don't use generic influence techniques. They customize their approach based on detailed psychological profiles they build through observation and strategic questioning. Recognizing this type of manipulation requires understanding the difference between ethical influence and psychological exploitation. Ethical influence aligns your interests with the other person's genuine long-term well-being. Manipulation sacrifices the other person's interests for your short-term gain. Ethical influence provides accurate information and respects autonomy. Manipulation distorts information and undermines independent decision-making. The key warning sign is when someone seems to know too much about your specific psychological patterns and is using that knowledge in ways that don't serve your interests. If someone is pushing buttons you didn't know you had, asking questions that seem designed to extract personal information, or presenting opportunities that feel perfectly tailored to your weaknesses, you may be dealing with a sophisticated manipulator. Protection requires developing what I call psychological sovereignty. The ability to maintain independent judgment even under sophisticated influence attempts. This starts with self-awareness about your own cognitive biases, emotional triggers, and decision-making patterns. The better you understand your own psychology, the harder it becomes for others to exploit it without your awareness. Psychological sovereignty also requires developing comfort with uncertainty and the discipline to slow down decision when you feel pressured. Manipulators often create artificial urgency or scarcity to prevent careful consideration. They want you to decide based on emotion rather than analysis. When someone is pushing for quick decisions or discouraging you from seeking outside perspectives, these are red flags that should trigger extra scrutiny. The second category involves social manipulation and group dynamics exploitation. This includes techniques like triangulation where manipulators create conflicts between other people to maintain control, gaslighting, where they systematically undermine someone's perception of reality, and isolation tactics where they separate targets from support systems that might provide alternative perspectives. These tactics are particularly dangerous because they operate over time and gradually change the social environment around the target. By the time someone recognizes what's happening, their judgment may already be compromised and their support systems may already be damaged. Protection requires maintaining strong independent relationships and regularly checking your perceptions against trusted outside perspectives. The third category is institutional manipulation, where influence techniques are embedded in organizational structures, processes, and cultures in ways that serve the interests of those in power while appearing neutral or beneficial. This might include performance review systems that create compliance rather than genuine development, communication protocols that discourage dissent, or reward structures that encourage competition rather than collaboration. Recognizing institutional manipulation requires understanding the difference between systems that genuinely serve collective interests and those that primarily serve power consolidation. The key question is whether institutional influences encourage independent thinking and diverse perspectives, or whether they systematically discourage questioning and alternative viewpoints. But understanding manipulation isn't just about protection. It's also about ensuring that your own influence attempts remain ethical even as they become more sophisticated. The line between ethical influence and manipulation isn't always clear, especially when you're dealing with complex situations where different people have conflicting interests or when you believe strongly that your agenda serves the greater good. The ethical framework for influence requires several non-negotiable principles. First, transparency about your agenda and interests. You don't have to reveal your entire strategy, but you should be honest about what you're trying to accomplish and why. Second, respect for the other person's autonomy and long-term well-being. Your influence attempts should genuinely serve their interests as well as your own. Third, commitment to accuracy and intellectual honesty. You shouldn't distort information or use false premises to support your arguments. Fourth, willingness to accept no as an answer. Ethical influence respects the other person's right to make different choices even when you disagree with those choices. If you find yourself unable to accept rejection or constantly trying to find new ways to overcome the same objections, you may be crossing the line into manipulation. Fifth, long-term relationship orientation. Ethical influence strengthens relationships over time rather than exploiting them for short-term gain. The most sophisticated test of ethical influence is whether you would be comfortable having your influence attempts used on someone you care about in a similar situation. If you wouldn't want someone using your techniques on your family member, friend, or colleague, then you're probably operating unethically regardless of your good intentions. Maintaining ethical standards while developing advanced influence capabilities requires constant self-reflection and external feedback. Power and influence capabilities can gradually corrupt judgment even among well-intentioned people. Regular reality checks from trusted colleagues or advisors can help maintain perspective and prevent the subtle slide from ethical influence into manipulative behavior. The ultimate goal is developing influence mastery that enhances rather than diminishes human dignity and autonomy. The most powerful influencers are those who help others make better decisions for themselves rather than making decisions for them. They expand choices rather than limit them. Increase understanding rather than create confusion and strengthen relationships rather than exploit them. Chapter 12. Negotiation Mastery. Creating win outcomes in high-stakes situations. Most people think negotiation is about getting what you want at the other person's expense. This zero-sum mentality is exactly why most negotiations either fail completely or succeed in the short term while destroying relationships and future opportunities. True negotiation mastery is about expanding the pie so that everyone gets more value than they thought possible. Creating outcomes where all parties feel genuinely satisfied with the result. The foundation of advanced negotiation is understanding that every negotiation is really about interests, not positions. Positions are what people say they want. Interests are why they want it. Most negotiations get stuck because people argue about positions without understanding the underlying interests that drive those positions. When you can identify and address the real interests at stake, creative solutions become possible that serve everyone's needs. This requires developing what I call interest archaeology. The skill of digging beneath surface positions to discover underlying motivations. Most people take stated positions at face value and miss the deeper psychological, emotional, or practical needs that those positions represent. Someone who insists on a specific price might really be concerned about fairness, worried about setting precedent, or trying to demonstrate competence to their organization. Interest archaeology involves asking strategic questions that reveal motivation without making people feel interrogated. Instead of challenging positions directly, you explore the thinking behind them. Help me understand why that particular approach is important to you. Opens up discussion without creating defensiveness. What would need to be true for this to feel like a good outcome? Reveals success criteria that might be achievable through different means. The key insight is that most people have multiple interests at stake in any negotiation, and these interests often have different priorities and different possibilities for creative resolution. Someone might care about financial return, relationship preservation, risk mitigation, timeline constraints, and reputation management all simultaneously. When you understand this full spectrum of interests, you can design solutions that address the high-priority interests for all parties. Advanced negotiation also requires understanding the psychology of value creation versus value claiming. Value creation involves finding ways to expand the total benefits available to all parties. Value claiming involves determining how those expanded benefits will be distributed. Most people focus exclusively on value claiming, fighting over a fixed pie rather than working together to make the pie bigger. Value creation requires collaborative problem solving where all parties contribute information, ideas, and resources to develop solutions that wouldn't be possible for any single party acting alone. This might involve combining resources in creative ways, timing exchanges to serve different priorities, or structuring agreements that provide different types of value to different parties. The prerequisite for value creation is information sharing, which requires trust and strategic vulnerability. Each party needs to share enough information about their interests, constraints, and resources to enable creative solution development. But this creates risk because information can be used against you if the other party isn't operating in good faith. Managing this information sharing dilemma requires building trust incrementally through reciprocal disclosure and demonstrating good faith through small commitments before larger ones. You start by sharing information that's valuable to the process but not dangerous to your position. Then gradually increase the depth of disclosure as the other party demonstrates trustworthiness through their own disclosures and actions. Another critical element of advanced negotiation is timing and sequence management. Most negotiations involve multiple issues that need to be resolved, and the order in which these issues are addressed can dramatically affect the outcome. Some issues are easier to resolve than others. Some create momentum for additional agreements, and some are interdependent in ways that require careful coordination. Master negotiators design negotiation sequences that build positive momentum and create psychological commitment to the overall process. They start with issues where agreement is likely, establish patterns of successful problem solving, then tackle more challenging issues from a foundation of proven collaboration. They also structure sequences so that concessions on one issue enable gains on other issues, creating trades that benefit all parties. The psychology of concession making is equally important. Every concession sends a signal about your flexibility, your priorities, and your commitment to reaching agreement. Concessions that are too large or too quick signal that your initial position was unrealistic and encourage more aggressive demands. Concessions that are too small or too slow signal intransigence and risk derailing the entire process. Effective concession making involves what I call strategic reciprocity. Each concession you make should be contingent on comparable movement from the other party, and the value of concessions should decrease over time to signal that you're approaching your limit. You also want to package concessions in ways that address the other party's interests while protecting your own priorities. Advanced negotiators also understand the power of alternative development. Your negotiating power is directly related to the quality of your alternatives to reaching agreement. If you have strong alternatives, you can negotiate with confidence and walk away from poor deals. If your alternatives are weak, you're vulnerable to accepting unfavorable terms just to avoid the consequences of no agreement. But alternatives aren't just about backup options. They're about creating competitive dynamics that encourage all parties to offer their best terms. When others know you have viable alternatives, they're motivated to make their proposals as attractive as possible. When they think you're dependent on reaching agreement with them specifically, they have less incentive to be generous. The ultimate goal of negotiation mastery is creating agreements that are so well designed that they implement themselves. This means building in monitoring mechanisms, adjustment processes, and dispute resolution procedures that prevent future conflicts and ensure successful execution. The best negotiations create frameworks for ongoing collaboration rather than just one-time transactions. Chapter 13. Leadership Influence: Inspiring Action and Commitment in Others. Leadership influence is fundamentally different from other forms of influence because it's not just about changing someone's mind or behavior in a single interaction. Leadership influence is about inspiring sustained commitment, ongoing effort, and voluntary initiative in service of shared goals. It's about creating an environment where people choose to give their best effort not because they have to, but because they want to. The foundation of leadership influence is understanding that people don't follow leaders, they follow vision. But most people confuse vision with goals or strategies. Vision isn't about what you want to accomplish or how you plan to accomplish it. Vision is about why it matters, what becomes possible, and how the world becomes better when success is achieved. People commit to vision because it connects their individual efforts to something larger and more meaningful than themselves. Creating compelling vision requires understanding the difference between personal motivation and transcendent purpose. Personal motivation is about what individuals gain from participation. Transcendent purpose is about what becomes possible for others when the vision is realized. The most powerful visions combine both elements, showing people how their personal growth and success contributes to outcomes that matter beyond themselves. But vision without competence is just inspiration without substance. Leadership influence requires demonstrating that you can actually deliver on the vision you're promoting. This means consistently making progress on stated objectives, solving problems that others can't solve, and making decisions that prove effective over time. People follow those who can turn vision into reality, not just those who can articulate inspiring possibilities. Competence demonstration in leadership is different from competence demonstration in other contexts because it's not just about technical expertise. Leadership competence includes strategic thinking, decision-making under uncertainty, problem-solving in complex situations, and the ability to maintain effectiveness under pressure. People need to believe that following your leadership will actually lead to success, not just good intentions. The second element of leadership influence is trust building through consistency and reliability. Trust in leadership contexts is about more than honesty and integrity. Although those are foundational requirements, leadership trust is about confidence that the leader will maintain their commitment to the vision and the team even when circumstances become challenging or when easier alternatives become available. This requires demonstrating loyalty to people and principles rather than just to outcomes. When leaders change their commitments based on convenience or when they sacrifice team members for short-term gains, they destroy the trust that leadership influence requires. People need to believe that their leader will support them through difficulties and remain committed to shared values even under pressure. Trust building also requires transparent communication about challenges, setbacks, and uncertainties. Leaders who try to project false confidence or who hide difficulties from their teams actually undermine trust because people can sense when they're not getting complete information. Authentic leadership involves sharing appropriate information about both positive developments and legitimate concerns. The third element is individual development and empowerment. The best leaders are those who help their team members become more capable, confident, and effective than they would be without that leadership. This requires understanding each person's strengths, growth areas, and aspirations. Then creating opportunities and providing support that enables their individual development. Leadership influence grows stronger when team members can see tangible ways that their involvement has made them better. This might be new skills they've developed, increased responsibilities they've earned, or opportunities they've received that wouldn't have been available otherwise. When people feel that following your leadership is genuinely good for their own development, their commitment becomes self-reinforcing. But empowerment has to be real, not just rhetorical. This means giving people genuine authority over areas of responsibility, supporting their decisions even when you might have chosen differently, and allowing them to learn from mistakes without punishment. Leaders who talk about empowerment but micromanage every decision creates cynicism rather than commitment. The fourth element is cultural influence. The ability to shape the unwritten rules, shared values, and behavioral norms that govern how groups function. Culture determines how people treat each other, what standards of performance are expected, how decisions are made, and what behaviors are rewarded or discouraged. Leaders who can influence culture have leverage over every aspect of group performance. Culture change requires modeling the behaviors and values you want to see rather than just talking about them. People pay more attention to what leaders do than what they say. Especially when pressure increases or when difficult decisions need to be made. The behaviors you demonstrate under stress become the cultural template that others follow. Cultural influence also requires consistent recognition and reinforcement of behaviors that align with desired values. People repeat behaviors that are acknowledged and appreciated. When you consistently notice and appreciate examples of the culture you want to create, you reinforce those behaviors and encourage others to follow similar patterns. The fifth element is adaptation and learning. The most influential leaders are those who help their teams navigate change, uncertainty, and evolving challenges successfully. This requires creating learning environments where people feel safe to experiment, make mistakes, and adjust their approaches based on new information. Leaders who can help groups learn and adapt faster than their competitors create sustainable advantages that go beyond any specific strategy or tactic. They build capability for ongoing success rather than just achieving immediate objectives. This requires being learners yourself and demonstrating comfort with uncertainty, experimentation, and course correction. The ultimate measure of leadership influence is what happens when you're not there. Teams that continue to perform effectively, maintain high standards, and support each other even in the leader absence demonstrate true leadership influence. This kind of influence creates self-sustaining systems rather than dependent relationships. Chapter 14. Organizational Influence. Navigating complex political landscapes. Operating effectively in organizational environments requires understanding that formal authority structures and informal influence networks are often completely different systems. The organization chart shows who reports to whom, but the influence map shows who really shapes decisions, controls resources, and determines outcomes. Master organizational influencers understand both systems and know how to work with each one strategically. The first principle of organizational influence is understanding that every organization has multiple competing agendas, priorities, and loyalties operating simultaneously. Different departments have different objectives. Various stakeholders have different definitions of success. Individual leaders have different career ambitions and risk tolerances. Effective organizational influence requires mapping these different agendas and finding ways to align your objectives with the interests of key influences. This doesn't mean compromising your principles or abandoning your goals. It means understanding the complex ecosystem of interests and motivations that shape organizational decision-making and positioning your initiatives in ways that serve multiple constituencies simultaneously. The most successful organizational influencers are those who can show how their proposals advance several different agendas at once. Mapping organizational influence networks requires understanding that formal authority and actual influence often reside in different people. The person with the title might not be the person who really shapes decisions. Sometimes the most influential people are those who control information flow, manage key relationships, or have historical credibility that gives their opinions special weight. Identifying these informal influences requires careful observation and strategic questioning. Who do formal leaders consult before making decisions? Who gets invited to important meetings? Whose opinions carry weight in group discussions? Who do people go to for advice or guidance? These informal influences often have more practical power than many formal authorities. The second principle involves understanding organizational culture and working with cultural currents rather than against them. Every organization has unwritten rules about how things really work. What kinds of behavior are rewarded or punished, and what values are actually prioritized regardless of what official policies might state. Organizational culture includes communication styles, decision-making processes, risk tolerance, change receptivity, and relationship dynamics. Proposals that align with existing cultural patterns are much more likely to succeed than those that require significant cultural shifts. This doesn't mean accepting dysfunctional cultures, but it does mean understanding cultural reality and either working within it or having a specific strategy for changing it. Cultural influence in organizations requires patience and persistence because cultures change slowly through accumulated examples rather than dramatic declarations. The most effective approach is consistently demonstrating alternative behaviors and achieving results that prove their value. Gradually showing others that different approaches can be successful. The third principle is strategic alliance building within organizations. No individual has enough influence to shape complex organizational outcomes alone. Success requires building coalitions of support among people who have different types of influence, different perspectives, and different resources. These alliances need to be authentic relationships based on mutual benefit rather than purely transactional arrangements. Building effective organizational alliances requires understanding what different people need to be successful and finding ways to support their objectives while advancing your own. This might involve sharing information, providing resources, offering expertise, or creating opportunities for others to demonstrate their value. The key is making alliance partners genuinely better off for their association with you. Alliance building also requires managing competing loyalties and conflicting interests within your coalition. Different alliance partners may have different opinions about specific tactics or timing. Some may have historical conflicts with each other. Managing these dynamics requires diplomatic skills and the ability to find common ground among people with different perspectives and priorities. The fourth principle involves strategic communication and information management within organizational contexts. Information is power in organizations. But it's not just about having access to information. It's about understanding what information different people need, when they need it, and how they prefer to receive it. It's also about controlling the timing and framing of information to maximize its impact. Effective organizational communication requires understanding formal and informal communication channels. Some information should be shared through official channels to ensure proper documentation and accountability. Other information is more effectively shared through informal networks where it can be discussed and refined before formal presentation. Master organizational influencers understand which channels to use for different types of communication. Information management also involves understanding that different organizational levels require different levels of detail and different framing. Senior executives typically want strategic summaries focused on implications and recommendations. Middle managers need tactical details about implementation and resource requirements. Frontline employees need clarity about how changes will affect their daily work. The fifth principle is timing and political awareness. Organizations have natural rhythms and cycles that affect receptivity to different types of proposals. Budget cycles, performance review periods, leadership transitions, and external pressures all create different windows of opportunity for different types of initiatives. Political awareness means understanding the current organizational priorities, the pressures that key leaders are facing, and the external factors that are shaping decision-making. Proposals that align with current organizational priorities are much more likely to receive attention and resources than those that require shifting attention away from immediate concerns. This doesn't mean waiting for perfect conditions, but it does mean being strategic about when and how you present different initiatives. Sometimes the right idea presented at the wrong time fails completely, while the same idea presented when organizational conditions align can succeed beyond expectations. The sixth principle involves building organizational capability rather than just achieving immediate objectives. The most successful organizational influencers are those who leave organizations more capable than they found them. This means developing other people's capabilities, improving processes and systems, and creating frameworks that enable ongoing success rather than just solving immediate problems. Capability building requires thinking beyond individual projects to consider how your initiatives contribute to organizational learning and development. This might involve documenting lessons learned, developing training programs, creating tools and templates that others can use, or mentoring others to take on increased responsibilities. The ultimate goal of organizational influence is creating positive change that becomes self-sustaining. This means building support systems, creating accountability mechanisms, and developing organizational capabilities that ensure improvements continue even after your direct involvement ends. The best organizational influences create lasting positive change that multiplies over time. Chapter 15. The Future of Influence. Building a Legacy of Positive Impact. As we reach the conclusion of this comprehensive exploration of influence mastery, it's crucial to understand that the techniques, principles, and frameworks you've learned are not just tools for personal success. They represent power. And with that power comes the responsibility to consider how your influence capabilities will shape the world around you. The question isn't just whether you can influence others effectively, but whether you will use that influence to create positive change that extends far beyond your immediate objectives. The most profound realization about influence mastery is that it scales exponentially. When you influence one person to think more strategically, communicate more effectively, or lead more inspiringly, that person influences others in their network. The frameworks and approaches you model become templates that others adopt and spread throughout their spheres of influence. This means that every interaction you have using these principles creates ripple effects that can spread far beyond what you can directly observe or control. Understanding this multiplier effect should fundamentally change how you think about the responsibility that comes with influence capabilities. You're not just shaping immediate outcomes in your conversations, negotiations, or leadership situations. You're contributing to the collective level of influence sophistication in your organization, your industry, and your community. The approaches you demonstrate become part of the cultural template that others use as reference points for their own behavior. This is why the ethical framework we discussed isn't just about avoiding harm in individual interactions. It's about recognizing that you're contributing to the evolution of how influence is practiced in your environment. When you consistently demonstrate ethical, effective influence, you raise the standard and make it easier for others to operate at higher levels. When you cut ethical corners or use influence capabilities manipulatively, you contribute to a culture where such behavior becomes normalized and expected. The first element of building a positive influence legacy is understanding that true mastery means helping others develop their own influence capabilities rather than just using your capabilities to achieve your objectives. This requires shifting from a scarcity mindset where influence is a zero-sum resource that you need to hoard to an abundance mindset where developing others' capabilities ultimately serves everyone's interests. This doesn't mean giving away your competitive advantages or making it easier for others to compete with you. It means understanding that environments where everyone operates at higher levels of influence sophistication produce better outcomes for everyone involved. When you're surrounded by people who can think strategically, communicate effectively, and influence ethically, every interaction becomes more productive and satisfying. Developing others' influence capabilities requires teaching through demonstration rather than just through instruction. People learn influence techniques by observing them in action more than by hearing about them in abstract terms. This means being intentional about how you conduct yourself in situations where others can learn from your approach. It means explaining your thinking when appropriate and helping others understand the principles behind effective techniques. The second element involves understanding that influence mastery creates opportunities to address larger challenges that matter beyond personal or organizational success. When you can consistently shape decisions, inspire action, and create positive change, you have the capability to contribute to solutions for complex social, environmental, or economic problems that require coordinated effort from many people. This might involve using your influence capabilities to address issues in your industry, your community, or causes that align with your values and expertise. The key insight is that influence mastery gives you leverage to create change that matters not just to you but to people who don't have direct access to the same opportunities, resources, or capabilities. But this requires thinking beyond immediate results to consider long-term consequences and unintended effects. Every solution creates new challenges. Every change generates resistance and adaptation. Master influencers think systemically about the broader implications of the changes they create and take responsibility for managing negative consequences as well as positive benefits. The third element is building influence capabilities that remain effective as the environment continues to evolve. The specific techniques and approaches that work today will need to be adapted as communication technologies change, as cultural norms evolve, and as people become more sophisticated in their understanding of influence psychology. This requires maintaining a learning orientation throughout your development rather than assuming that mastering current best practices will remain sufficient indefinitely. The principles underlying effective influence are relatively stable, but their application needs to evolve as contexts change. This means staying curious about new research, experimenting with new approaches, and remaining open to feedback about your effectiveness. It also means developing influence approaches that are robust across different contexts and cultures. As our world becomes increasingly interconnected, influence mastery requires understanding how your approaches translate across different cultural backgrounds, generational perspectives, and communication preferences. The most effective influencers are those who can adapt their style while maintaining their authenticity and ethical standards. The fourth element involves understanding that the ultimate measure of influence mastery is not how much control you can exert over others but how much positive change you can inspire in the world. This requires defining success in terms of contribution rather than domination, collaboration rather than control, and empowerment rather than dependence. The most successful influencers are those who help others become more capable of creating positive change themselves. They use their influence capabilities to build systems, develop people, and create conditions that enable ongoing improvement rather than just solving immediate problems. They think in terms of building capacity rather than just achieving outcomes. This approach to influence mastery creates what I call generative influence, where your efforts create expanding circles of positive impact that continue growing even after your direct involvement ends. Instead of creating dependence on your continued involvement, generative influence creates independence and capability that enables others to carry forward the positive changes you've initiated. The final element is understanding that influence mastery is ultimately about service rather than power. The techniques and principles you've learned throughout this exploration are most powerful when they're used to serve something larger than your immediate self-interest. This doesn't mean sacrificing your own needs or goals, but it does mean understanding how your objectives can align with broader purposes that benefit others as well. Service-oriented influence creates a different kind of authority and credibility than power-oriented influence. When people sense that your influence attempts are genuinely aimed at creating mutual benefit and positive change, they respond with greater openness, trust, and commitment. When they sense that you're primarily focused on personal gain, they naturally become more guarded and resistant. As you continue developing and applying these influence capabilities, remember that you're not just becoming more effective at achieving your goals. You're becoming part of a larger system of human cooperation and progress. The sophistication with which you think, communicate, and influence sets an example that others will follow. The ethical standards you maintain help define what becomes acceptable and expected in your environment. The positive changes you create contribute to a world where influence is used as a force for human flourishing rather than exploitation. The future belongs to those who can influence others, not through manipulation or coercion, but through insight, integrity, and genuine care for collective well-being. Master these principles, apply them ethically, and use them to create the kind of world you want to live in. The power is now in your hands. The question is what you will build with.